It's my pleasure to welcome three authors who are amazing scholars and practitioners, and with whom I have had the pleasure of working on a combined 24 books in the Corwin Mathematics imprint over the last 5 years. Beth Kobett is professor in the School of Education at Stevenson University, where she works with pre-service teachers and leads professional learning in mathematics education, both regionally and nationally. She's the author of 9 Corwin math books, ranging on topics from formative assessment in math, mathematics lesson planning, math coaching, teaching math through a strengths-based lens, and a forthcoming series of books on rich tasks for grades K through 5. John SanGiovanni is a mathematics supervisor for Howard County Public School System in Maryland, where he leads math curriculum development, digital learning, assessment, and professional development for 41 elementary schools and more than 1,500 teachers. I can't imagine the feat that is right now. Among John's many publications are 7 Corwin math books, ranging on topics of helping to identify and bolster students' unfinished learning, using daily routines for number sense and reasoning, and helping students to work through productive struggle in mathematics, which I'll share some of today. And last but certainly not least, Sara Delano Moore is Director of Professional Learning at Origo Education and an independent mathematics education consultant at SDM Learning. Sara's book publishing includes contributions to 6 Corwin math titles, including the popular Visible Learning in Mathematics series with John Hattie and the Mathematize It series, which helps teachers engage students' reasoning in working through word problems, and she'll be sharing some of that with you today as well. So welcome to my friends. I'm so excited to listen and learn from you today. And take it away.
Thank you so much, Erin. We are super excited to be here tonight, and we really appreciate all of the support that we've received from you, Erin, and from Corwin as well. So, can I invite my colleagues into a discussion about this messages of COVID slide, these ideas of remote, hybrid, face-to-face, and even the word COVID slide. What does that do to you? Now, we want you to be really active in the chat. Sometimes they're going to ask you to put some things in the chat, but just make the chat a stream of consciousness. Just let it go and let us know what you're thinking as we're talking. All righty. So, John, we were talking about some of the news headlines that we've been hearing about COVID. And so we put together this little slide between the three of us, John, Sara, and I, looking at some of the recent news reports that we had heard. And we were thinking about what is this doing to us as we read these kinds of things. So John, can you want to pick one and tell us what you were thinking about it?
Man, I really could talk to all of them, but I think the green one, it drew my attention as you were talking. The the hurt could last a lifetime. This notion that it's a hurt and the negative connotations there concern me, but more importantly, I don't know what I learned in 3rd grade that lasted me a lifetime, but I guess my point is that the idea that this loss will set students up for failure for their lifetime just sits in a terrible place for me. What about you, Sara?
It seems to make the thinking, the assumption is this is going to go on forever, as you said. I look at the description in gold, and some of the folks in the chat are making the connection to summer slide. Mm-hmm. But this idea that we can project that the average student has already lost potentially 200 or more days of learning in mathematics. I admit I've been a little nervous to do the math. I'm not sure the pandemic's gone on for 200 days yet. I know kids haven't missed 200 days of school.
I was gonna question the math in that report, but I thought now wasn't the time.
I'll go there. One of us has to. But just that idea of we're all thinking about the negatives of this rather than these are kids. We support them where they are. We meet them where they are when they come back. I see Melissa's comment in the chat about resetting. And that's what resonates to me, is how do we use this as a reset, not a panic attack. Beth?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to talk about this with some levity because seems so outrageous to look at all of these, and these are just the few we selected. I don't suggest that you do a Google search of this because it does impact you. When you see all of this on one slide, thinking about this idea could be a lot worse. I'm looking at the little blue bubble at the bottom on the left-hand corner. Could be a lot worse than you think. Meaning, I don't think this is already really tough. I do. Every day I think this is really, really tough. And I'm watching so many teachers working so hard and so many parents and families and students working so hard. So be a lot worse. Actually, it spurs on the imagination to actually dream up worse things that are happening right now. So I am watching this chat. Are you, Sarah and John, seeing some things in here you want to lift up? Because I am seeing some amazing comments here.
Yeah, that there are some challenges ahead, but it'll be okay. That teachers do what they always do, and that is meet students' needs. And we're meeting maybe different needs, but we can do that. There are real challenges ahead, not to minimize anything, right?
Right.
Finding new solutions is something we have always been good at. Sarah?
Well, and these comments about the equity concerns that we need to think about, these remote learning is not affecting all children and all families in the same ways. We need to think about that. The good of what we've learned about what technology can do is something that can help. And I saw a comment reminding us that when we look at what's happened after hurricanes, after the earthquake in Christchurch, some of these other times that natural disasters of one sort or another have disrupted schooling for a period of time, kids are resilient. And does it change things? Yes, but kids are resilient and we all pull together and move forward.
So with that, we wanted to take a moment to really discuss and talk about what we're seeing and how it may be impacting us. And then also this notion of how does this deficit perspective about our students, our colleagues, our families, how is it influencing our teaching practices? Are we making different decisions than we might be? Not because we're consciously thinking about it when we may be, but more, are we making different choices because we're so scared, that we're in fear mode, that we're so worried? Is that impacting the decisions? And are those, do you think, Sarah and John, the best decisions that we could be making?
I think the fear is impacting how we make decisions. And the teachers always recognize that we're responsible for other people's children. Mm-hmm. And that is a tremendous gift of trust from parents and families. And the stakes are high, and the stakes are higher. Someone in the chat used the phrase anticipatory anxiety. Mm-hmm. We worry about what might be. And how do we remind ourselves to take a breath? Yes. John, what are you thinking and seeing?
Yeah, it may position us to chase the wrong things when we think that we have to fix everybody and everything. And that maybe there's some other opportunities that I see popping up in the chat as well, that we may be able to take advantage of now. And so reframing or rethinking about how we fix our students and instead building on who they are and what they can do might be a good opportunity.
Beautiful. So, I mean, I hope that we can save this chat forever, because I think I might need to print it and read it, because it's super inspiring, the kinds of things that you all are saying and that you're doing. So one of the things that we want to talk about is the notion of the deficit cycle and this remote learning headline about COVID loss, which we recognize there are significant challenges. We recognize that, and we are not diminishing that at all. But I think what we want to think about is this idea of opportunity and how we might be able to reframe it so that we can lift up what teachers and families and students are doing. We know there are lots of vicious cycles that students kind of can get into in schools, deficit cycles, where they may be feeling that they are in sort of the behind. They're always behind. And so this is throwing us into a bigger perspective on that. John and Sarah?
No, you said everything I was. I have no value added at this point there, Beth. Sorry.
All right. Well, so now we've set the stage. Sarah, did you want to add anything?
No, I think it's this whole idea of how do we change our habits? How do we use this as an opportunity for a reset, as somebody said in the chat? And that's really what we're focused on today.
Love it. Okay, so what we wanted to do was talk about the reality, what we're all seeing and facing, and how that's impacting us. And then now we are here and we are going to fly by with some thoughts, some ideas, some activities, and so on that will support you in reframing it. So I'm going to talk to you about strengths. My co-author, Karen Karp, and I have been doing this work for several years and in some schools, and we're going to share some wonderful things with you. I hope that you'll be able to try out. But the idea behind the strength space is really how do we lift up our students to show the incredible brilliance that they hold. So go for it in the chat. Here we go. Think about the words used to describe a learner who struggles. And so those are those words that are talked around the student. They might be from one colleague to another. They might be to a family member, but they're about the student. And then also think about those words spoken to a learner who struggles. So this piece here is, go ahead, put them in the chat, go for it, start thinking about those words. And then I'm going to say showing difficulty, needs support, low babies, here it comes, low level, behind, struggles, challenge, learn in a different way, strugglers, extra love friends, low level, lobies. Okay, these are have gaps. These are pretty negative. And the question around this is, and I want you to think about this for a moment, and this connects to this deficit perspective in terms of COVID, but in your interaction, in our interaction with students, does it change what we do and how we perform and what we say? So what if we captured all these words? I've done this work many, many times with teachers, and we put them all down. We look at them, we face them, because here's the idea around this. All of these words, these headlines, this kind of language creates energy. And that energy changes the way that we interact. Think about it for a moment. Have you ever just had an interaction with someone like at the grocery store, someone you didn't know, and it was not good? And the next thing you did is you went in and you sort of carried that forward. On the flip side, you may have had a really positive interaction. Those words, those actions create energy, and those students know it. So here's what we're thinking about. I can't do a presentation without this. This has driven the work, and I have to say has also been life-changing for me. The words we speak become the house we live in. And so imagine if you took all the words all day long that you said, and I think I've said some frustrating words today. I've taught a long day. I've taught some hybrid, some remote, I transported, I had a meeting, like all of you. And sometimes I was frustrated today. Well, those words created a little energy cloud around me. And they changed the way that I interacted with the next group of students that I was talking to. I'm really working hard on thinking about how I'm going to reframe that. And I'm going to move past that. I'm going to be thinking about how my beliefs and expectations change the ways in which I design my instruction. And that's what we're going to hone in on today, because we know that if we have low expectations, our instruction is lower. We tend to reduce the cognitive rigor. We tend to make it easier for students. And in that case, we will not be able to help our students sustain and grow in the best way they can. So that we begin with this premise that all children are brilliant. And I want you to think about this in this way. You know, we do a lot of comparing. Beth's skills in this area are average compared to Sarah's skills in this area. Well, what if those skills are just really good compared to other things that I do? See me as my own person with my own set of skills and not in comparison to someone else. If we believe all children are brilliant, we will change the ways in which we design the instruction that we're thinking about. So there are 5 entry points into this idea. One is, and this is so hard for teachers, is to identify your own teaching strengths. Yes, I mean it. Tell us what you're good at. What do you do well? Not in comparison to someone else, but what do you do well? And how, some teachers say to me, I don't know, Beth, I'm so tired, I can't do this right now. No, stop and do this. Because here's the idea. When you are in this area of what you do well, you are energetic, you are creative, you are in the flow. It's fabulous. Okay. We also look at our students' mathematical strengths, which we're going to do tonight in just a few minutes. And then really importantly, we design our instruction to strategically focus on what our students do well. And then we leverage it to their challenges, because we all have challenges. We also help students develop their points of power and work in the school community. This is a 5-pronged approach. You can't just do one of these things if you really want to attack this deficit perspective and lift up the strengths. So one way of looking at mathematical strengths, and this was so much fun and again, really impactful in the school community, looking at students' math strengths from these areas. Notice it does not say good at adding, good at subtracting, good at multiplying, dividing, good at calculus. It says conceptual understanding and fluency. And of course, these are from the National Research Council, adding it up. And we looked at students and we found some amazing things. Take a look at this. How many of you have heard, I don't get it, I don't understand it, this doesn't make sense? How did you interpret it? Hold on for a second. Did you interpret it? Or how do other people interpret it? Yes, I love that, Dawn. Always we hear this. That is beautiful, because what they are doing, I'm going to go back for a second, is they are seeking conceptual understanding. And in fact, they're showing identity and agency to say, I don't understand this. Means I deserve to understand it. When we're in trouble is when they give up and they don't want to, they don't even know, they don't even demand to understand something. So the component is conceptual understanding. They are, and Karen coined this phrase, which is they're conceptual understanding seekers. They say, I need to understand. They are seeking sense making, which Sara is going to share with us in a little bit. Boy, you can't lose when they're doing that, because they'll keep going. Another one is strategic competence. They love, these are the kids that pull out representations, they're talking about details, they're making predictions, they're doing all kinds of really exciting things like that. They are strength and strategic competence. So take a look at this little example here. When could 1/4 be bigger than 1/2? Use words and pictures to explain your answer. Yes, we will share the PowerPoint. I just saw that in the chat. So tell me, what do you think the student's strengths are? So of course the student didn't get it correct, but what are the strengths? Anything? Looking for some visual representation. Beautiful. They understand fractions of the same whole, right? The modeling. There's so many beautiful things. I also love this sort of disposition. Impossible, and it's not possible because. So I'm not messing around with you. This is a beautiful way of thinking about how a student has strength. Okay, now next question. What would you do to leverage this strength? So sometimes we say this is wrong, but what would we do to leverage it? Yes, you guys are fabulous. So this leads us to the feedback loop, where we are really strategically thinking about, do we use strengths feedback? Are we saying, wow, this is what is correct, this is what you're doing well, and here's what I want you to think about as you're going to address this challenge. So you want to specifically hone on what the student is doing well. And I'm telling you, when you do this work and when you're specific about it and explicit about it, students just shine. I think I'm running out of time. Okay, here's a couple other things that I wanted you to think about. That is this idea that students give us feedback. They are giving us feedback on what we are doing well by showing engagement, enthusiasm, and that's when we know what we are operating in our strength. This is one example of a 2nd grade group that pulled this together, and they said, we had been looking at designing some instruction around building communication strengths. And we explained that it wasn't just explaining your ideas, because they knew that. And it wasn't just using models, because they knew that too. But this whole piece of active listening, like actually being heard, you all know is so powerful. So we worked on building that powerful active listening, and they came up with this list. This is how you know. This is how you know someone's listening to you. This is what you do when you're giving feedback to one another. And it built that mathematical authority, identity, and agency, and they really became really powerful at it. Do you not love ask for permission before making a suggestion? Do you not love that? I know John's giving me a signal, I believe. Are you, John?
No, I'm not.
I'm done. I'm done. These are just some ideas also about building their points of power. And I want to give a little Stacy Shaner, who's at Severn School, a little shout out, who's doing this work right now and just got featured in a little newspaper article. So John, I am going to turn it over to you to talk about leveraging productive struggle.
All right. So I wasn't signaling anything, I promise. So Beth, you say so many important things. I want to touch on those as we move forward. And you know, all of you said something really important when you thought about struggle. Often struggle has this negative connotation about it, right? And the notion is that, well, struggle is something that we don't want to have happen, and that students are going to struggle, and that's something we want to avoid. But here's some things we need to know. Struggle matters, and it matters a lot, and it's necessary for learning mathematics with understanding. Struggle leads to long-term benefits. I mean, I think about my own kiddos in this house, and the note that I want them to be problem solvers and thinkers that can solve problems for themselves. As a math teacher, when my students failed, or struggled, I should say, I felt like I let them down. And that's something that I think is unique to us as teachers in the United States. We see student struggle as our own failing. But when struggle is purposeful and it's done with meaningful mathematics, it tells students that math is more than just procedure and right answer. And I think one of the things that exacerbates the concern with the slide is that the slide being the COVID slide, is that, you know, this recall of rote information is going to be a problem, right? We believe, my co-authors and myself believe that, and that Susie Cott and Kevin Dykeman believe that we must prepare, provoke, and promote struggle. And we believe that struggle is all about action, which is something I struggled with as a teacher, right? It was something I was waiting to have happen, and then I'd react to it. And productive struggle is much more than that. So I think, as someone said in the chat box, this disaster that is COVID is an opportunity to reframe lots of things we do, and productive math struggle is one of those. I also want to talk to you about action. As Beth said, we need to think about students' identities and foster those positive identities and capabilities. We need to build communities that embrace, classroom communities that embrace struggle and know how to interact with it with productive norms and what have you. And the two actions I want to focus on with you this evening are thinking about planning for struggle and supporting it when it happens. So let's talk a little bit about planning for struggle. Think to yourself just for a moment, what constitutes a good math task, or a task that promotes productive struggle? So you might have said things like, there's multiple entry points, that it is an interesting, authentic task, that it constitutes or requires thinking, right, and reasoning, representations, and what have you. But when we plan for struggle, it's not just the task that we select, but we have to think about other things as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those in this time together too. But keep in mind that one thing I wasn't prepared to do was the plan for struggle. In fact, often I was planned to scaffold and avoid the struggle and not be prepared for it, but more importantly, promote it and provoke it. So when we think about quality tasks and things that kiddos should be doing with mathematics, here's an example of two different math tasks in a fourth grade classroom. We're all familiar with the one on the left. As a friend says, fractions become the study of round foods and shaded parts. And problems on the left, or worksheets on the left, kind of, well, develop that notion, right? Whereas the task on the right is going to promote a different type of struggle. We mask the things in the red by giving copious amounts of that because frankly, the task isn't that quality, that high quality task. And so, we have to mask that by giving more and more problems. And then the struggle becomes compliance and, things of that nature. But a good task has kids get dirty with the math. Sure, they're going to struggle, but that's a part of learning. And I wanted to lift this up in a couple of different ways. And thinking about how do we take a task from our program, from our curriculum, right, and be a critical consumer of it. Is that a high quality task? And does it promote the right kind of struggle? But more importantly, does it promote the right kind of understanding, right? Are we looking for students when they come back to us full time, so to speak, to be regurgitating information or thinking and knowing mathematics deeply? And you take a look, the one on the right in the green box, that's a significantly different question, is it not? Shade it in 3 different ways so that they all show 6/10 and tell how you know they each do. Some of my students would have struggled with that idea because they believe that you could only shade it from left to right using columns. And this goes on to many things, and a good task doesn't have to be eccentric. A good math task can be something as simple as instead of confining students to think about addition the way that we want them to open up problems so that they can express how they go about the work. And so one of the things that we have to do today, tomorrow, in this world, hybrid or virtual, whatever case you may be in, but more importantly, as we continue to make up for this slide, we have to reframe it in good math tasks that promote the right kind of struggle. But as we select tasks and plan for them, we also have to think about other things, right? How do I unleash this task? Is it a direct instruction thing? Maybe not. Do I use whole groups or small groups? How do I put my group size together? And how many problems are in the task? And what are the sizes and types of those numbers? What about the tools that my students have access to? Do they know how to use them? Right? And so there's other things I need to think about as I provide resources to support students during the struggle. But I really want to talk with you about how do I unleash the math? So you're familiar with both approaches to teaching mathematics, but well, one causes a different type of struggle than the other. And I want to talk about the green as being the preferred method of launching a task, letting students engage with it, but then giving them the opportunity to come back together and share their thinking as I then put ideas together and help clarify and focus the mathematics, right? The other is a way of just telling them to do math the way I want them to do it. But even then, it doesn't prepare for the right type of, well, problem. What I mean by that is, as I circulate and look at challenges that kiddos have, I might need to pause. I need to pause them as they engage in that launch and debrief, or excuse me, the engagement time. Interrupt, ask questions of the whole group, and then talk about that before going back into the cycle. If you're familiar with fishing, it's the notion of catch and release, right? So as students work, I'm circulating around looking for things I want to spotlight, asking questions of the whole class, because sometimes that debrief is too late and the struggle has unraveled and it's become unproductive. So in other words, in a moment of catch and release, I might notice of some things that students are doing while I'm circulating, and I might say to the whole class to pause for a second. Jesse's group wasn't sure how to show the problem. How did you represent it? And so a couple of student groups might share their ideas, at which point I say, okay, nice. And that unsticks Jesse's group, potentially. And then they get back to work and I continue to circulate and looking for the things that I want to, well, unstick. But I have to plan for how I unleash a task and how I support it and what have you, right? Another way this might sound is, as I'm walking around the class, I get to group 2, and I might just pause the whole class and say, I'm just checking in. Does anyone have a question to ask the whole class? Oh, let's stop and take a look at someone else's work. My point is that as I plan and implement a lesson, I have to be prepared to respond to the struggle that's occurring, but not to correct the struggle that's occurring. So it starts with a really good task, and then it's planning for how am I going to implement it well. I share catch and release with you as one option, and though they're this is the one spotlighted, of course there's many others. I also want to talk briefly about how we support it. One of the actions that we write about is this notion of how do we support struggle when it occurs. And there's 2 steps to that. One is knowing the why. Why do students struggle with math content, the lesson, the topic? And so Warshauer writes about these. We had one in there. But students struggle for a variety of reasons, and each one of those is an opportunity to advance them. But I know as a teacher, I often say, oh, my kids are struggling, and I never really could put my finger on what exactly they were struggling with. And being prepared for struggle also means that I'm prepared for them to support themselves. So I do want to leave you with just 2 ideas about how you might help students support themselves when they struggle, because this is about thinking and making sense, not finding my answers to my problems, if you understand what I mean. So take a look. One of the things that we lift up is this idea of struggle moves and helping students persevere themselves. And so I shared a thinking map with you tonight, maybe something you're familiar with. Works at all grade levels, no matter what grade level you represent. Take a look. The store has 13 cans of tennis balls. Each can has 3 balls in it. How many tennis balls does the store have? And so one of the thinking maps we use with our students is this notion of, what do I know about the problem? What am I trying to find out, and how might I solve it? And I know there's lots of other thinking maps to use as well. It's just the one I wanted to lift up with a spin on it. Because often we focus on just the math, the numbers, the action. And so I might change this slightly. As you notice, giving kiddos the opportunity to write down what they notice about the math, but also what they notice about the context within the problem, as well as asking other questions. And what's my point? Well, take a look at the middle. That problem might be a little bit more challenging when you wonder, are there more balls in the back of the store? Or why do they come in a can? Because when I ask a student to draw a representation of it, the notion of tennis balls in a can might be unfamiliar, right? So they can't do a representation because it doesn't make sense. So these are some of the struggle tools that we lift up, and again, want to make sure that students make use of. It works with any problem, right? And it doesn't have to be a fancy black line master or reproducible. They can just jot down what's something I know, want to find out, and a strategy I'm going to use to solve the problem. In fact, it works in middle school very well, as you might suspect. And so the thing that I leave you with as we pivot over to Sara is this notion of struggle's a good thing. I have to plan for it so that the right ideas about math are developed. And then I also have to have tools in their toolbox to support them when they struggle. Because the go-to move for struggle is not be, I don't get it, right? Instead, I want them to harness what they can do and how they move forward. And again, these types of struggle moves occur with all types of content in math, but sometimes, especially with, well, word problems. So thinking about word problems as we pivot to Sara, would you do me the honor and just write down in the chat box, what's the purpose of a word problem in math class? Because these are things that we suspect to be the biggest problems.
Exactly. Thanks, John. And I see putting numbers in context. I see applications to real life. Interpretation. I love this list because all too often when I talk to teachers about word problems, the implication is that word problems are there to torture kids, or maybe to torture the teacher, or that in some sense they're narrative computation. And my colleagues and I would argue that really the purpose of word problems is to build what we call operation sense. And the idea of operation sense is that we're showing all the work, students know all the work that the mathematical operations can do. What's going to happen in my world? What am I going to see in a real life application or situation? All the different ways you all are talking that lets me know, hey, addition could be helpful here. Multiplication could be helpful here. And as I think about that, I've got to think about several aspects of this. Kids need to know all the work an operation can do. Addition's not just, I baked some cookies or I earned some money. It might also have to do with comparison, the larger value, the smaller value, the difference between them, those kinds of ideas. I need to be able to represent the operations in different ways. I need to be able to mathematize, and this is the part you all were really highlighting in your chat comments, that I can see a contextual situation and say, hey, here's the math. And then I need to work in a variety of number categories. Think about this, depending on what age you teach. Have you ever been in a situation where you give kids a word problem with whole numbers, they're fine? You change nothing about the problem except the numbers become fractions. It's like it's a whole new world. It's that transfer idea of being able to take what I know about addition and recognize it, no matter what kind of numbers I have. Are they fractions? Are they decimals? Are they integers? Whatever it might be. And so our focus is really, when we work with word problems, on the idea of mathematical comprehension. Clearly, we need to have the reading comprehension. But that's an entry point. John talked about getting dirty with the math. Kim Marley-Young and Linda Gojak, my colleagues, and I talk about being in the sandbox and playing around with the math to prove that we really understand it. It's not about computation. It's not about speed. So here we are late on a Monday afternoon or evening, depending on where in the country you are. I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of math. Take just a moment and think. If you've got some scratch paper nearby, you can sketch. How would you represent this problem situation? An architectural drawing of a building gives a side view. It shows the elevation of the basement to be -12 feet and the elevation of the roof at 32 feet. How much higher is the roof than the basement floor? Take just a moment to make a sketch on paper with a pencil if you've got it, in your mind if you don't. How might you represent this? And because our focus today is on finding strengths, because our focus today is on productive struggle, I'm going to show you 4 examples of student work. And as you look at them, I want you to think about where are the strengths in this work and chime in the chat. So I'm going to work through the 4 samples one at a time. Each one's on a different colored background. So you can talk about A or you can talk about green. And then I'll come to a slide where you can see all 4. But I wanted to start this way because the work's a little bit bigger. What's strong? What's good in this work? These first students, the distance from the bottom of the basement to the top of the building is 44 feet. And you can see their picture and they've added. In this next one, we've got a couple of attempts at an equation. 32 subtract -12 is 20, and then 12 plus 32 is 42, and a nicely detailed drawing. In this next one on the left, you see some what I know thinking, negative, positive, same signs add and keep, different signs subtract. The roof is higher than the basement floor by 20 feet. And that rectangular drawing, -12 at the bottom and 32 feet on the right. And then the last one, another drawing on the left, the middle, and 32 feet up, -12 down with the basement. We think it's 44 because it's keep, change, change. So we ended up adding it. That's how I learned it. So it'd be 32 minus -12. So it's like this, 32 plus +12. And so if I pop all these up together, I see some interesting comments from you around representing ground level or that idea of 0. And 0 sometimes is absolute. On a number line, 0 is 0. But in a context like this, 0 is ground level, which could be any sort of altitude or elevation, those kinds of ideas. I see some nice comments about absolute value, distance and direction. I see some thinking about memorized rules and conceptual understanding. And one of the things that's really interesting, and the reason I chose an integer example for you, is that there's a lot of research out there that says that children can reason really well about integers. They don't do very well with conventions. And that's our focus here. It is that we want to start with really strong student thinking. All these different ways of looking at the problem, making sense of the problem, finding what is good and what strengths there are. We can move kids towards conventions. Thinking about how do we annotate addition and subtraction? How do we show the different uses of the negative sign? It's a verb to subtract. It's an adjective. This is a negative 12 as opposed to a positive 12. Sometimes it's a toggle, that opposite idea. We can build their conventions from their thinking, because we can say, hey, this drawing that used the first one on green that used the absolute value idea, let's connect what you showed here to this idea of absolute value we've been studying, and let me show you how mathematically we write it. Because what we're doing is connecting representations. Look at what you saw there in the student work. We had pictures. We didn't have anything concrete. We're operating in a virtual world. That one's harder. But we had pictures. We had symbols and equations. We had references to context. We had narrative description. From somewhere in all of that, we can see what kids are doing, see where they get it, and where they're starting. I like that comment, Cheryl. We can see where kids are starting in their thinking, and then move towards the conventions, the notation, some of the complexity of what we're doing here. The other reminder I want to give you is that what we're doing in this case with word problems, when I talked about operation sense, it is the idea that students know all of the work of the operations. We have intuitive ideas, multiplications about equal groups. But then you get to integers. What does a negative number of equal groups mean? What does it mean in that context? Or addition is only about active adding in. So what happens with part, whole? There are whole structures for describing all the different work of the operations. And these are in many states part of the standards or the unpacking documents at the elementary level. They also apply in middle school. So those of you who are middle and high school folks, as you think about work with integers, as you think about work with ratio and rate and proportion, these same ideas come into play. And so what we were looking at in that one example about the height of the building is one of a dozen different contexts and ways in which we use addition. There's a comparable version for multiplication. That's a deeper dive than we have time for today, but I share it because it's the background knowledge we need to think about what strength am I finding here? What's my instructional purpose? If it's not computational practice, if it is context and when we use adding and subtracting, that's what it is. And that's the work that, as I said, my colleagues Kim Marleong and Linda Gojak and I have done with the Mathematize It piece. How do these ideas apply all the way through the different grade bands? As we think about where we've been today, we'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'm going to invite Beth and John to come back up. We'd love to hear your thoughts about how are we reframing this idea of the COVID slide? How are we hope we're changing your thinking about all those headlines that we started with. Beth, you want to begin to circle us back around?
Yes, so I think that as we think about activating student strengths, some of the things that we're just going to recap a little bit, and then we'd love to answer some questions. A couple of things that you can do right away, I mean, immediately at this moment, is first identify your own teaching strengths and lift them up, talk about them, share them, and then those of your colleagues. So, because that is really the most important work to do, because you can't do the next part, which is to activate student strengths, unless you do that. So I would ask you to take a moment and think about that. Write some questions down, write some ideas down that you have about yourself as a good teacher, and particularly as you've navigated this challenge, and then begin making the list for your students. And then there are very strategic things that you can do to lift them up, even in a virtual environment or a hybrid environment. So we celebrate strengths every single day, every single class. We celebrate the strengths that we are seeing. We call them out, we notice them, and we make sure that everyone, every single human in that learning community gets lifted up. So that's something that we want to be thinking about. And I did hear about families, and I think we can address that all together. But let's go ahead and let John do a quick recap of productive struggle.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. I think, again, COVID is an opportunity to reframe struggle, and that for so long, struggle has had a negative connotation, and that we're right now worried about how our kids are going to struggle when they come back to us. And I think now is a great time to think about how struggle is an opportunity for making sense, making meaning, and shaping thinking for a lifetime. But to be fair to us as teachers and for all, many of us haven't been trained or don't know exactly how to work through struggle. So one thing that I would share is to investigate productive struggle and what actions can we take from getting to know our students and knowing them well, to framing good communities that support struggle, to planning for struggle. And one thing I didn't mention tonight, celebrating and reflecting on struggle. In fact, one of the things I shared with you tonight was about supporting struggle as an action, and talking about how to catch and release, and how that's an opportunity to, support a struggle before it unravels and becomes unproductive. And I noticed in the chat, one of the questions was like, well, how do you do that virtually? And how do people do catch and release virtually? And so before I pivot over to Sara, anything that we do with struggle, we can do virtually. Thinking about catch and release, we might have students working in small groups in breakout rooms, right? And teacher is jumping from room to room, observing. And when she sees a certain thing going on, she might bring everybody back together, interrupting that breakout room. I know things are clunky in the virtual world. I live there every day like you do. And so maybe that doesn't work, or maybe you have policies against kiddos working in breakout rooms by themselves. And so at that point, you might ask for a group to come to you into a breakout room and talk with them, and dropping them back into sessions. Monitoring jam boards and pausing the class as they work on those jam boards to discuss what's coming up and what's being done and what's being thought about, right? But I think this big idea of pausing them as they work to discuss the challenges they're facing, what doesn't make sense, what are they trying to make sense of, and how they're going about it, and so forth. So before I pass to Sara, I just think I would double down on this notion that now is a great opportunity to reframe and make use of struggle. Sara, how about you?
It is. It's a terrific opportunity to reframe a lot of things. And as we think about reframing struggle, we can also think about sense making. Kids are being forced to work more on their own, rely on maybe a sibling, maybe a parent, maybe a pod, but to really think as more self-directed learners. Lisa's got a comment in the chat that really resonates, I think. That's not going to be successful unless what we're doing mathematically makes sense. And so we've got to continually, as Beth started out, when a child says this doesn't make sense, or I don't know what they mean, invite that and celebrate that as an opportunity to say, let's figure it out together. Let's make it make sense. And let's find where it makes sense and pull you from that place to where we want to end up. We have some goals. If I keep with my integer example, there's some notation and some conventions we need to get kids to. But let's start them where they are with that intuitive understanding and sense making, and then show them what conventions we use to make sure that everybody reads things the same way, because mathematically that's going to help us later. But the focus is always on, does it make sense? Do we comprehend? My husband's a reading educator, so we spend a lot of time in that world of reading comprehension. And for us, it's about mathematical comprehension. Do you understand the math in a meaningful way? Can you see it?
So I think this, what's so interesting about, I'm looking at things in the chat, is that this idea that, and I love what you said, Sarah, that if you see a student either engaged in productive struggle or engaged in sense making by saying, I don't understand, you actually lift that up by saying, you know what, that is showing me that that's important to you and that you deserve to do that. You deserve to advocate for yourself, to say that doesn't make sense. And I think that idea of helping name it so that students know that you are in productive struggle, that's okay. That is actually a good thing, because that's what we're all in right now. Or you're problem solving or sense making, whatever it is. I think those are the kinds of things that help students understand why they're doing what they're doing. I thought there was a really interesting question about families, and I think I popped in the chat, but it was to just the panelists, a parent toolkit. Because one of the things that I think that all these headlines are creating are family stress, that their children are going to be behind, that they're not going to be able to overcome this. And so I popped in the chat a free parent toolkit that you can use and download and share with your families to help them begin to celebrate the strengths that their children have. I will probably never forget having a meeting with family members, and the school had begun strengths-based work, and so every person in the room went around and lifted up the student's strengths, who obviously had lots of learning challenges, and the parents were overcome with gratitude that and the mother said, you see him. And I don't know that all of our children feel seen. And so this is an opportunity to help see them and see who they are and help them move to the next level. It really does take a village. It really does.
I want to add one note, and that is giving ourselves some grace and trying to continue to do that, especially, I mean, in the world that we're in and how we're trying to get through it and what have you. But when it comes to struggle, right, that's another thing in that, it has a lot of negative connotations, and we always feel like we're doing the wrong thing, or how do we fix kids and how do we swoop in and what have you. And giving them some time to figure it out and giving ourselves some grace when we might not make it perfect every day, but the next day I'll be okay too, right?
Right, exactly. So at this time, I see that people are having trouble with the parent toolkit. So let me try it again. I'm not always the best at all this multitasking. Let's see if this one will work. So do we have some other specific questions that you all might have for us? You can either pop them in the chat. Well, yeah, you have to pop them in the chat. Love to be able to address them. I did see one about promoting, specifically promoting productive struggle in the virtual environment. And so I don't know if you want to address that, John, and then I see some other questions coming up.
So just, I was reading and listening at the same time. So this is how are we working with kiddos that aren't engaging in struggle? Is that what you said?
Yeah, well, how do we recognize it in the virtual environment so that we can then promote it?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, it's hard. I recognize that. So, when students don't have their cameras on or aren't able to attend class, or even in a hybrid situation, right? It's hard to monitor that. I don't know that I have any good tips off the top of my head. One thing I will say about struggle in general is that our students recognize the negative connotations around struggle as well, especially in mathematics. And so, reshaping and reframing that is going to be critical as well. And I'm not just talking about, growth mindsets. I'm talking about really, struggling, persevering, and maybe not being successful. And so to answer that question, Beth, I don't have a good answer off the top of my head virtually, but I do think in general, we need to begin to dig into helping students recognize the value of struggle, but more importantly, getting them to actually engage in it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and John, you're triggering a thought for me that I see a little bit in the chat of, as particularly for teachers who are working virtually, the time they have is different now. Where in face-to-face school, we might have had 60 or 90 minutes a day to do math. Now we don't. And so we're going to need to rethink balancing how we invest the time that we have as teachers and students together, and make sure that we give those opportunities for productive struggle,
well,
and make it all fit. It's a different equation.
That's a great point. It's a really good point. I think there's another thing too that we don't do well, or I haven't done well. So let me just make it about me. This notion that we don't celebrate struggle and we don't reflect on it. We never put it away. We give awards for being the fastest at this, or we give, PBIS beaver bucks to kids who follow the rules in the school, but we don't actually honor productive struggle or students who persevere and try new strategies and what have you, even if they're unsuccessful. So maybe also changing the narrative around what do we celebrate, and maybe that tells students what we value is struggle.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really nice point, and I see a comment in the chat from Kristen about rethinking grades. It's too late in the day to go down that road, but I think a conversation many of us would enjoy having. And what do we recognize?
So, I want to just say one more thing too, and that is, if we're going to look at productive struggle, I have extreme productive struggle in some things and none at all in others. Mm-hmm. For example, the remote control. If I can't make I love technology. I think I'm pretty decent at it, but when it becomes the remote and the television, I will just turn it off and forget it if I can't get it to figure out what I want. So I also think part of this is figuring out where it is that you hold that and where your strengths lie in what areas, so that you can then leverage it to other areas. You will play a game you'll play a game forever, right? So how can we take that same thing you're doing there and move it to the mathematics lesson? So that's kind of a little thought that I had, but I can't believe it's 7:29.
I know.
And
so thank you everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate it. What a great presentation, Sarah, John, and Beth. Thank you so much. Just to let everybody know, if you go to corwin.com, you will save 20% on the books listed here on the math series. And if you use the promo code MATHSHIP, which is all one word, you'll get free shipping as well on those titles. So please go to corwin.com and purchase these titles at a great discount. Also, just to let you know, your professional development certificate is in the email. It'll come by the end of the week, along with a link to this recording. So you'll have that to go back over in the near future. So thank you all for joining tonight. It really was terrific.
thank you. It was wonderful. And we really honor all the work that you're all doing out there. So please take a moment and celebrate what you're offering to this universe and to this world. We value and appreciate you.
We do. Thanks, everybody, and stay well.